Welcome back to the daily Rambam class. We are up to chapter 13 of the laws of forbidden foods. Let's see, as we usually do on a Thursday, where we are up to in the Rambam at large. In fact, in approximately less than 2 months, those that study 3 chapters a day will be concluding the entire Rambam, which means that you will have concluded a third of the entire Rambam, which is quite a huge accomplishment. So let's see where we are up to. We are in volume number 5. We spoke about the fundamental knowledge of things we need to know about Hashem, and then mitzvahs that relate to our love of Him. Everything in the cycle of time, from the process of waking up in the morning to Shabbos, to Yom Tov, all the laws relating to women as far as marriage and divorce and other laws that relate to that. And then now we're into the 5th volume, which the Rambam calls Sefer Kedusha, the volume that speaks about 2 mitzvahs that make us holy, or that express our holiness. The one mitzvah being the mitzvah to have, or many mitzvahs associated with not having forbidden relations, and we had 22 chapters about that over just over 3 weeks of learning. And now we're learning the laws of forbidden foods, 17 chapters, which would be just over 2 weeks of study. And we are up to today, chapter number 13. I did something different today. I actually have a summary of all of the 17 chapters on forbidden foods, so you can see where we're going with all of this. So we have, we started by speaking about non-kosher species, and then an animal that's kosher but wasn't shechted or was ill. We spoke about blood and non-kosher parts. We spoke about milk and meat. We spoke about chodosh, new grains. And finally, we are in today, chapter 13, which is the third of 3 chapters that speak about wine. And what's left to come is measurements, how much a person needs to eat in order to be liable, and what happens if things get mixed up in the kitchen. Inevitable in every kosher kitchen, usually when you call up the rabbi and you'll say, you won't believe what happens. So that will be the last of the 17 chapters of the laws of kosher. Now on to today's laws. Today we'll be learning the laws of, as I said, the 3rd section that deals with wine. Here's a summary of the laws that we'll be covering. I'll leave that on the side so that you could follow along as we get there. But let us begin. So the Rambam starts by speaking about a scenario where somebody rented a home and wanted to store wine in that home. Okay, so you went into Airbnb, or you went to a hotel, or you rented a cottage, and in your cottage you have a room where you are storing wine. Now, the property doesn't belong to you, the home doesn't belong to you, but you're renting the space. The question over here is, since you're not the owner of the property, since somebody else actually owns the property, what do you need to do in order to ensure that the owner of the property isn't going to get in the way of, that isn't going to cause your wine to become non-kosher. So that's the first scenario that we'll speak about. Then we'll speak about what happens if you're not actually renting the home, but rather the non-Jew is hiring you to watch the wine that he's making in order for it to be kosher, which is something that can be quite common today. And then a whole lot of other laws. Let's go through them. Just a moment, please. There we go. The following rules apply when a Jew purchases or rents a building in a courtyard belonging to a non-Jew and he fills it with wine. If the Jew is living on premises in that courtyard, then the wine is permitted, even if he left the door open. Why? Because the non-Jew will always worry, saying he may suddenly enter his building and find me there. Meaning, if you've rented out the house, then the non-Jew, although he owns the property, has no business being there. And since you're on property, he has a concern that you might suddenly show up, and so he wouldn't go into his tenant's property. If the Jew lives in another courtyard, then he should not depart until he closes the building and keeps the key and the seal. It sounds like he needs a double seal since it's not his own property, and he doesn't need to worry that the non-Jew will get in a locksmith and make another key and get into his own property because you rented it out. And so in summary, if you are renting a space, if you're on site, then that always works. But if you're off site, then you need to make sure the property is locked. Otherwise, the landlord might just say, well, anyhow, the tenant right now is away. Let me go and see what's going on with my property. And he would possibly cause the wine to become not kosher. Now, if the Jew left the building without closing the entrance or closed it and gave the key to the non-Jew, then the wine becomes forbidden. Because once he gives the key to the non-Jew or he leaves the door open, he's inviting the non-Jew to go into the property, at which point he could cause the wine to become non-kosher. Perhaps the non-Jew entered and poured a libation. As we say, these were non-Jews that were quite fanatical about using any wine they could to be served to an idol. We'll see later in the chapter that nowadays things have somewhat changed in this regard, since the Jew is not present. If the Jew told the non-Jew, hold the key for me until I come, then the wine is allowed because he didn't entrust him with guarding the house, only with holding the key. So he locked the house and he said, can I leave the key with you? But he wasn't saying that he could go into the house, and therefore we can assume that the owner of the property didn't enter into the tenant's space. Now the next three halachas speak about if the wine is actually being produced on the non-Jew's property. So the following laws apply, meaning that the Jew isn't renting out the space to live in. So he hasn't become a residing tenant. Rather, the wine is being produced in the property of the non-Jew without the Jew renting out the residence. So a non-Jew hires a Jew to prepare wine for him in a state of ritual purity, so that it will be permitted to the Jews, and they will purchase it from him. So you have a non-Jewish winemaker, and he wants to be able to sell to his Jewish clientele. So in other words, he wants to have kosher certification. So what does he need to do to ensure that his wine will not be touched by himself? So if the wine is stored in a building belonging to the non-Jew, then the Jew that's guarding the wine needs to be staying on the courtyard, and then the wine will be permitted. Even if the door's opened, as long as the mashgiach, which is what it is in modern terms, is there, he's present, he's around, then the non-Jew is not going to touch the wine because he wouldn't want to be caught by the mashgiach, at which point the wine would become non-kosher. However, if the guard lives in another courtyard, the wine is forbidden, even though the key and the seal are in possession of the Jew. Why? Since the wine belongs to the non-Jew and is found in his own property, so there's nothing really stopping him from calling a locksmith and getting another key, even though it was locked, and getting into the building. And he'd say, what could be? If they find out about this, then they won't purchase from me, so I won't sell to my Jewish customers. I'll sell it to my non-Jewish customers. This is obviously a relevant halacha today as well, beyond just wine. Could relate to restaurants and different scenarios where we're saying that even a person that has the key is the mashgiach or the Jew. If the property is owned by a non-Jew and it's his restaurant or it's his wine, then even a locked door doesn't guarantee that he won't be able to get it. And unfortunately, there have been many a story of owners of properties using undeclared side entrances to get into properties that officially were only able to be opened together with mashgiach, which is why really the only good certification is if the mashgiach stays on premises. Which means in practical terms, you have often wineries that will do a season or a cycle of kosher wine, and then they get mashgichim to live on the winery, which is quite a dedication of the mashgichim, because it means that they're not able to go to a minyan. They're stuck. They can't go anywhere, because if they're not present on property, there's no guarantee that the non-Jew may decide to play around with the knowledge that, if it doesn't work, so I just won't sell to my Jewish clients. Today, there probably could be legal action taken against such a person, because I imagine that when a contract is drawn, they probably do include that the legal action could be taken against the person that's against the contract. But even with that, unfortunately, many a time such a thing has happened. Even if non-Jew wrote a legal document for the Jew stating that he received the money for which he agreed to sell him the wine, since he didn't actually receive the money, but he wrote a document as if the money's already been received. Since the Jew wouldn't actually be able to walk off with the wine until he actually pays, so let's pretend it's useless. The wine still belongs to the non-Jew, and therefore it is forbidden unless the mashgiach is residing on premises. The guard does not have to sit and guard the wine at all times. Rather, he can come in and go out. If he wants to run off to the supermarket or this or that, that's fine. As long as at any given moment he can show up, then that's considered like he's there the whole time. And this would apply whether the wine's being kept in the owner of the wine's property or another non-Jew's property. Okay, when the pure wine belonging to a non-Jew was placed in the public domain, or in a building that is open to the public domain, and there are Jews going back and forth, it is permitted, for it has entered the Gentiles' domain. So if it's in a very public space where everybody could see, if the non-Jew goes and touches this wine, then that would also act as a deterrent. I wonder how cameras would relate to that today. Or if it's in a garbage dump, he's locating his wine, or in a window under a palm tree, even if it doesn't have fruit, it is as if it's located in the public domain. And when a non-Jew is located near the wine in such a place, it's not forbidden because people can see what's going on. A house which is open to such a place is considered as if it is open to the public domain. So if there's actually visually people can see what's going on inside, then the mashgiach doesn't have to be present because everybody can see what's going on if there is that level of transparency. Okay, here's an interesting one on trespassing. So when you have two courtyards divided by a low barrier, so you don't have a wall, electric fencing, barbed wire, you simply have a little, low fence that you could easily step over. On one side, there's a non-Jew, meaning it's a non-Jewish property, and on the other side, Jewish property. Or there are two roofs, with the Jew's roof located above the Gentile's roof, or the two roofs are located side by side, but they are divided, separating them. Even though the non-Jew can easily step into the Jew's property and touch the wine and disqualify it if he has idolatrous intentions, or even without, as we've learned. So we don't worry about this. Why? Because it's trespassing. The non-Jew is not going to want to step into somebody else's property, even if it's so easy. There's no electric fencing or barbed wire. There's no alarm system. You could simply step inside. Since it's not his property, we're not concerned that he will trespass. Okay, the next three halachas now go into seals. It is permitted for a Jew to entrust his wine to a non-Jew for safekeeping in a closed container, provided it has two distinguishing marks. This is referred to as a seal within a seal, meaning, different examples, if he has a closed barrel with a utensil that is not tightly fitting, as most people do, and then seals it with clay. So he had a barrel that was covered, and then on top of the cover, there was a second clay seal. That's all one seal, sorry. So the cover with the clay seal constitutes one. I guess because the first cover is not tightly fitted, so it's kind of just loosely sitting around. If the container is tightly fitted and then you applied clay to it, then it's considered a seal within a seal. So practically speaking, if you're getting a meal from a kosher Nando's or wherever it is, and they have it wrapped in silver foil, and then on top of the silver foil there is a based-in tape, so that's a seal in a seal because it's tightly wrapped, and on top of the tight wrapping there is an additional, the equivalent of a clay thing on top of it that if it was tampered with would be noticeable. You can't just move it aside. Similarly, if one tied the opening to a wineskin closed, that would be one seal. And if you turn the opening to the wineskin inside and then tied it closed, it's considered a seal within a seal. Not so familiar with wineskins to know exactly how that will look. Similarly, any deviation from the ordinary pattern people follow is considered as one seal, meaning once you're already just doing beyond the regular, that's one seal, and applying clay or tying it is a second seal. Now, when do we need two seals? We'll get to that in a moment. But before, I think that's in halacha number 10, or actually maybe in the few halachas that follow. If a Jew entrusted wine that was closed with one seal to a non-Jew for safekeeping, it's forbidden. So he's not allowed to drink it out of concern that the non-Jew may have touched it, but he would be allowed to benefit from it. He would be allowed to sell it, provided it had a designated spot. So basically, it's somewhat at risk, not completely. It's a little bit at risk, not totally at risk. There are no seals. There is one seal. So that helps as far as being able to benefit from that wine, sell it, but not enough for him to be able to drink it. Two seals are not necessary. Imagine when you get a regular bottle of wine today, if it's not mevushal, either way, I think the way the wine is closed is it has two seals. It's first tightly closed, and then on top of that, there's the plastic that seals it down, meaning you're kind of breaking the bottle open in two ways, which is why you would be able to buy any wine, a bottle that seals from a non-Jew, because it has a built-in double seal. Okay, if the wine is mevushal, or if it's beer or wine that was mixed with other substances like honey or oil, or vinegar, cheese, and any substance that is forbidden only by the rabbis to be left by a non-Jew, then one seal will suffice. However, two seals are necessary for wine, meat, and pieces of fish that do not have signs and which were entrusted to a non-Jew. So this is a general principle. If you receive a package that has in it wine or meat or fish that doesn't have its fins and scales, it needs to have two seals in order for it to be kosher. So for example, if you're on the airplane and they have a chicken meal or a fish meal and it's missing one of those two seals, meaning that maybe the based-in tape has been broken open, but the silver foil is still tightly wrapped, then that would be a problem. So these particular foods, the rabbis require not just one seal, but a double seal, and wine is one of them, or at least not mevushal wine, uncooked wine. Now, this is a very interesting halacha. The Rambam says it appears to me that anywhere in this context that we have stated that wine is forbidden to be drunk, but one may benefit from it, meaning like if you left the bottle with only one seal, basically any scenarios where there's concern that the wine may have been touched by a non-Jew, this prohibition is only if it's an idolater, if the non-Jew actually serves idols. If, however, the prohibition has arisen because of a Gentile who is not an idolater, like an Arab, in fact, the halachic authorities say today most non-Jews are not idolaters. So if you know that the non-Jew is not an idolater and he didn't touch the wine, you're just concerned that he may have touched the wine. Or if he did, it was completely unintentional, then it appears to the Rambam that you would be allowed to drink such wine. So this kind of lightens things up for everything we've been learning over the last 3 chapters. If you know that a non-Jew touched wine and it wasn't unintentional, then the wine is not kosher. But if you're just concerned that he may have touched it, if he's not an idolater, then you would be able to be lenient. So that's quite a significant halacha. Okay, more about different rabbinic enactments. When, however, one deposits wine in the domain of a non-Jew, resident alien means a non-Jew that keeps the 7 Noahide laws, or he sends wine with him, or he departs for an extended period, or leaves one's home open in a courtyard that one shares with a resident alien, with a non-Jew, it is forbidden to drink the wine, for it appears to me that the suspicions that a non-Jew will exchange wine and forge a seal apply equally to all non-Jews. Since the wine enters their domain, it is forbidden to at least to drink it. So he says this phenomenon that we don't need to worry about a non-Jew touching wine if he's not an idolater is if it isn't in his possession. If it is in his possession, in his domain, then or an easy access of him. I'm looking at the third scenario. One leaves one's home open in a courtyard. I guess it was in your home, but the door was wide opened. In these scenarios, there is concern that he may have switched the wine or touched the wine. Here, the concern actually isn't that he may have touched it for idolatrous purposes. Rather, the concern is that he may have just switched it for other wine. And he's not sensitive to the gravity, the level of sin involved in non-kosher. To him, one wine, another wine, they look the same. Maybe I'll make a silent exchange. I'll give him mine and I'll take his. So therefore, that would be a problem to leave something with only one seal in the possession of a non-Jew, something that usually needs two seals. I've mentioned before the story, I haven't confirmed it, but the story goes of somebody who was on the plane and he got his kosher meal and he opened up his kosher meal and then he needed to use the washroom and he came back and then his guilty conscience started coming to him. He knew, he had learned in the Rambam class that if you leave meats, as we just saw, or fish unattended and without any seal, it becomes not kosher. On the other hand, what could possibly be not kosher about it? After all, it had the seal on 2 minutes ago. Anyhow, he's having this debate up and down, up and down. By now, the guy sitting next to him has already finished eating, and he sees that he's sitting with the food open in front of him, and he hasn't put a thing into his mouth. So his friendly, the guy sitting next to him says to him, "Why don't you enjoy yourself?" He says, "Look, you'll think I'm crazy, but we have this law that's, the second kosher food is left unattended and it's not sealed, it becomes not kosher." And the guy says to him, "Actually, your Torah does you well, because I've always wanted to know the taste of kosher meats. I thought, what would be the big deal? Our chickens look pretty similar. Our meats did look pretty similar. I did a quick switch, and I thought, does it really make a difference? Chicken is chicken. Meat is meat." And your Torah has really protected you, because I apologize, but the food in front of you is in fact non-kosher. There are situations when the prohibition against wine poured as a libation does not apply at all. Yet our sages forbade them as a safeguard against libation. So this is an interesting one. A non-Jew should not, we're talking specifically about uncooked wine, non-mavushal wine. Remember I mentioned before, maybe not to you, but any kosher bottle of wine must always say on it either mavushal or non-mavushal. Either it was cooked or it wasn't. There's a world of a difference. If it has been cooked, then there's no problem if it's handled by a non-Jew. If it's never been cooked, then it is a problem. So any bottle of wine will say mavushal or non-mavushal. So right now we're talking about non-mavushal wine that was not cooked, which is where we're more concerned. So the rabbis actually forbade a non-Jew from mixing water into the wine, because that's the way he's mixing it this time. Next time he might instead pour the wine into the water, at which point the wine would be non-kosher. He shouldn't bring grapes to the wine press, lest he come to actually press them or touch the wine. He should not help a Jew when he pours wine from one container to another, lest he leave the wine in the possession of the non-Jew. If the Gentile assists the Jew, mixes water into wine, or did any of these things, it's still kosher. So the rabbi says at the outset he shouldn't do any of these things, but if he did, that works. Similarly, it's permitted for a non-Jew to smell the fragrance of our wine, and it's permitted for a Jew to smell the fragrance of non-kosher wine, because there's no prohibition against this, because fragrance is of no consequence since it has no substance, at least in the halachic context. I see that we're running short on time. We'll do as best as we can. Now the next 13 halachas, 12 halachas deal with if the wine became idolatrous, if the wine became non-kosher, then you're not allowed to actually get any income out of that wine. You're not allowed to have any benefit from that wine, which could be quite costly. So let's run through these halachas. We've already explained that whenever it is forbidden to benefit from a substance, if one sells it, one would be allowed to use the income that he made off it, with the exception of something that was used for idolatrous purposes. Anything that it was used for idolatry, their accessories, their offerings, wine poured on them, one needs to be more strict about anything that was used for idolatry And so even if you sold it, you would not be allowed to benefit from any money, any income that you got off it. Accordingly, when a non-Jew hires a Jew to work with him with wine, since this wine is non-kosher wine, the Jew actually would not be allowed to use the money that he makes. Similarly, when a Jew rents a donkey or a boat to transport wine, the payment for him is forbidden. If he gave him money, he should bring them to the Dead Sea, meaning he should throw them into the ocean. It's literally, you can't have any benefit. You can't even give it away, because then there's a certain degree of satisfaction when you give it as a gift. If he gave him clothes, utensils, or produce as payment, he should burn it and bury the dust, so that he doesn't benefit from it at all. When we come to the fundamental belief of one God, if a Jew in any way derives benefit from a belief that believes that there isn't only one Hashem, Chas v'shalom, then he needs to completely destroy any form of benefit. If a non-Jew rented a donkey to ride and place containers of wine on it, the rental fee for the donkey is permitted. However, if a non-Jew hires a Jew to break barrels of wine used for idolatry, then he's allowed to take payments, and may he be blessed, because he is removing idolatry from this world. But a person hired a worker and tells him, transport 100 barrels of beer for me, and I'll give you 100 prutos. And one of them turns out to be wine. The Jew cannot use any of the 100 prutos he received. But if he told him, transport barrels for me, for every barrel you transport, I'll give you 1 pruta, and it turns out that one of them was forbidden wine, then he would be able to take the first 99 prutos for the 99 bottles of beer, and then one fell, or maybe not, because then he's not actually benefiting from money that came from wine. When a non-Jew sends Jewish craftsmen a barrel of wine as part of their wages, it is permitted for them to tell him, give us its worth. However, once it enters my domain, then it's already mine, and now to say, can I exchange this for something else, would be too late. It's forbidden. When a non-Jew owes a Jew money, a money, which is 100 of something, 100 prutas, I think, it is permitted for the Gentile to sell a false deity and wine that had been poured as an libation and pay his money back. Why? Because this is all happening in the domain of the non-Jew. The non-Jew is converting his idols into money, and now he's bringing that money to the Jew. However, if before he sells them, he tells the Jew, wait until I sell this false god or this libation wine, and then I will give you the profits, then the money is forbidden. This is regarding even any wine touched by a non-Jew. The rationale is that the Jew desires that the forbidden item exists so that it could be sold, so he could get his debt paid. But if the non-Jew didn't tell him in advance, he doesn't care about its existence. Similarly, when a convert and a Gentile were partners, and they came to divide the resources of the partnership, the convert may not tell the non-Jew that you take the false deities, you take those idols, and I'll take the kosher stuff. Why? Because it means the Jew wants the idols to exist so that he could get the other stuff. Contrast to that is a convert, a non-Jew that converted, and his non-Jewish brother that inherited their father's estates. We allow the Jew to tell the non-Jew, you take the idols and I'll take the other value, because we don't want to cause the Jewish convert to go back to his non-Jewish ways if he sees that he's suffering a tremendous financial loss. Following rules apply when a Jew sells his wine to a non-Jew. Okay, now the next few halachas, I see we've already gone over time, so I'll just skim through them, is if you're actually selling the wine to the non-Jew, so if the non-Jew is going to take the wine and then pay you, the moment he handles it, it became already forbidden. And when he pays you, you're receiving a wage for something that's forbidden, so that's a problem. So you need to set it up in a way that first he pays you while the wine is still kosher wine, and then he takes it. And then what happens afterwards is none of your business. And that's the general discussion over the next few halachos. Here's another very interesting one. If a Jewish employer gives money to a storekeeper and he tells his non-Jewish workers, go and eat, you're right, he leaves a money in Pick and Pay, and he tells the non-Jews, his workers, go to Pick and Pay and buy yourself whatever you want. So if his workers buy wine, it's a problem, because this wine is wine that was purchased by the Jew. And so the Jew is benefiting from forbidden wines. Rather, the way to set it up is to make it an account where the Jew can tell the storekeeper that, let me know how much I owe you. Because once it's one general account that's outstanding, then you could pay up the account. It's not like he's now purchasing wine for the non-Jew. On the contrary, you told the non-Jew to get whatever he wants. That was between the non-Jew and the storekeeper. And now the storekeeper has an account for him to pay up. So he's not paying for something that's forbidden. Rather, he's just paying a debt. The same concept applies also with regards to foods that may not be eaten in the sabbatical year. And we come to our final two halachas. Interesting scenario. If you have a king that has royal wine and he wants to supply the whole country with wine, and so everybody needs to pay their amount and they get their supply of wine. Now the Jew, it's not kosher wine, but he's still going to be required to pay his part. So if he tells the non-Jew, take this money and get the wine for yourself, and then I guess maybe pay me back, it's a problem, because he's purchased it with the Jewish money. But if they made it more vague and he just said, you know what, here's 200 zuz, avoid me from having to go to the king, then he hasn't appointed him as an agent of handling something forbidden, and that's fine. Finally, 28, if a non-Jew intentionally touches Jewish wine in order to try to cause it to become damaged, you would be allowed to sell that wine. Usually we said you can't have any profits from forbidden wine, but if the non-Jew intentionally tried to cause you financial damage, then the rabbis were lenient and said you would be allowed to sell it in order to not to suffer a loss. It is as if he destroyed it or burnt it, in which cases he would be obligated to pay. Thus, the money the Jew takes from him is money for the loss and not money for the sale. That brings us to the end of chapter 13 of the laws of forbidden foods.